This is Sahant, and you're watching Mezrab Storytelling, stories from around the world. Once a month, storytellers gather in the Mezrab Cafe to tell true stories. This is one of them. I think it was about 2 months ago that we had a night here that suddenly, in the middle of the storytelling night, we decided to do some tap dance. It was a crazy experiment. Who was here when we did the tap dance? A bunch of you. So we still had the stage on, and then this shy little British girl came up, and she started a story with, "I'm so nervous I can't feel my face." And then she told her story, which knocked it out of the park.
Yeah.
And it was this thing where I'm like, yeah, but I knew, because I travel to the UK, and I see these snotty little 13-year-olds, and they're funnier and wittier than my comedian friends, and they're just taking the tube in London. It's something about, my father calls them genetically sort of, they're good performers, they're good with language. So here's another performer that you'll love to hate a little bit. Hannah Bowman. Where are you, Hannah? Right, give it up.
Shit, so he puts me on after Moraine and then he gives me an introduction like that. Well, let's see how we do. If you're here in the Mezrab this evening, I'm guessing you're somebody that loves words, speaking them, sharing them, singing them. But this story isn't so much about what we speak, it's more about the power of silence. And it begins with a promise and it begins with a goodbye. And that sounds much more profound than it actually is, but sometimes you have to sort of court the genre a little bit. And the goodbye was, I was again, it's set in Guatemala, I don't know if you were here last time, and I was saying farewell to a group of my mates. We'd been travelling together, and the idea was that we'd come back, and this was the promise, that we'd come back, that we'd reunite after Christmas apart, and we would learn to go and dive in Honduras. Fabulous. I was totally obsessed with this one guy called Zach, super hot, very excited. Went back to England. At this point, things started to go. I wasn't 100% sure what was going on, but the communication between us became a little bit abstract. There was talk of we've started a quest. We need to go into the light, and then they would just go silent again for a period of days. And I was like, fuck, okay, I've really got to get back. Zach's amazing, Mark. Fine, whatever. And then as the radio communication gradually died away, the last message I received was this. We are at the volcano lake. Find us in the pyramids. I was like, wicked. Okay. Fine, good. Not concerned, not overly concerned at this point. I had somewhat of a set of clues to go on. So we get on the plane. I arrive back in Guatemala, some chicken buses, a few boat rides later, and I find myself in this small little village on the edge of a lake called San Marcos. Maybe some of you have been there. Fucking weird place. It's like hippie-fi. It's absolutely stunning, but basically it attracts people because of the ley lines kind of go in a certain way, and apparently it's really good for the energy and all of this kind of thing. So things were I was slightly apprehensive at this point. This was definitely not 100% what I'd signed up for, but still fine. The sun was shining, good. And then I'm reunited with my mates. I'd left them, this kind of boozy, adventure-faring group, and I was met by, they were wearing very sort of flowy things, and their eyes were sort of hazy, and they were hanging out with people called like Shakar and Rainbow. I'm like, oh, all right guys, okay, good. My suspicions were confirmed at the point at which Zach invited me to go and do some chanting in the medicinal gardens. Right, okay, good. What's going on? And it turns out they'd been sucked into this place called the Moon Course. Now, the Moon Course was very much concerned with the notion of pyramids, and it all came together with the ley lines and so on, and all of this kind of jazz. And they had this thing which is very particular to being in a cult, and that is the fear of an outsider. In this little meatless womb of the Moon Course, nobody could come in if they didn't subscribe to the idea of being part of the Moon Course. And they would say it like that, the Moon Course. So I was in or I was out, and I had a choice to make. I mean, he was really hot, so I was like, yeah, fine. I'm in. Let's do this. Now, the leader of this whole shebang, or whatever you would call it, was a woman called Chaddy the Witch. And she had this little band of followers, and they were all called names like, they had their sort of stage names, so Fire and Earth and Wind, like sort of like a weird version of the Power Rangers or Captain Planet or something. So all there, and they were very into certain things. So one of those things was the astral world. That's where Chaddy was building her ark, by the way, which she invited us to join her in this construction process most evenings. Other members of the Moon Corps claimed to meet her there regularly. I don't know, I was slightly sceptical about this. The other thing was lucid dreaming. And they would spend hours talking about how they could get into this state where you're aware of what it is that you dream about. And I was still sort of a little bit of an outsider at this point, but that's something that I can actually do kind of all right just by accident. So this gave me a little bit of an in. They, honest to God, like you would literally, so you'd walk around and everywhere up on the walls there would be little signs and it would say, "Are you dreaming? Are you dreaming?" And so the idea being that the habits that you start to process within the waking world filter into your dream state. So you would, oh, am I dreaming? I'm fucking dreaming. So now you can control your state. Same thing goes with your hands. Apparently, in a dream situation, you can't find the detail in your palm. So you'd be walking around, people would just be... Okay. But I'm not going to lie to you, I was getting into the whole thing. Like I was like super bendy, we were doing yoga all the time, it was sunny, Zach was there looking sort of like a little bit emaciated at this point, but fine. And we're having until the retreat. Now the retreat was something that I absolutely had not subscribed to. It was 10 days of silence and fasting. So you didn't eat and you didn't speak to anybody. The eating was less problematic because you kind of go into this weird state after about 3 or 4 days where you're slightly separated from reality. You're so hungry that your energy levels kind of start to come up again. The really difficult thing was being in the silence. Because all that shit that you didn't know that you had in your head starts filtering up to the surface, and it is terrifying. And you can't do anything to mitigate it. You can't go and I'm going to go and chat to my friends, or go and have a coffee. You couldn't even eat. You just had to sit there. I just remember sitting on this rock, just like this thought just going around in my head. It was like obsessively dark thought patterns, and it was terrifying. And some people legitimately couldn't cope with it. One guy left his girlfriend in the middle of the night. He just left her a note and said, "I'm gone," and not to contact him, not to come back. I broke my silence once. I'm not proud of it. It was with the word fuck when I dropped my Ray-Bans into the lake. So I feel like that was sort of fair enough. And there were only like this group of Guatemalan children playing. One of the things you were allowed to do, that you were allowed to do two things. You could go to the Pyramid Library and you could read a book about, I don't know, like I learned loads of weird shit that I can't remember now. But the other thing you were allowed to do was write. Like these streams of consciousness. I would just sit in my room, streams of consciousness like pouring out of me. And you could like do chores. And suddenly the most mundane of activities seemed so incredibly interesting. Be like, oh, I could make my bed now, but might come back, do that, save that for later. So that was all, and like the trappings of humanity that you'd usually sort of distract yourself just simply weren't there anymore. And then one evening in the guided meditation session, which is a whole I can't even get into that particular, we went to places together. It was weird. They said, "Oh well, congratulations! Now you're halfway through." Halfway through, and I'd literally been like, okay, like the time lost any sense of meaning, and I was sure, but no, we still had, and it just stretched away, and somehow, we made it to the final night. And we're all standing there outside of the Pyramid Temple, wearing white, obviously. We didn't have white. Actually, our little group didn't really have white. So they have this special dressing up box of white stuff for like people who weren't one of those people that go to this on a regular basis. You know, they go from LA and they only eat tofu, and that's their thing that they do always. This was like the special, like it was a bit baggy or whatever. We were all just standing there in the garden looking around. This is so weird, but kind of like I really enjoyed being a part of that moment. There was something so completely alien about it. Nobody talking to each other, because that was the thing. When you're in your silence, you couldn't even catch somebody's eye because the human desire to communicate with somebody else is too much. So you walk around with your eyes on the floor, and there we were just standing in the garden kind of swaying in the evening breeze. And then finally we go into the temple. You get into the temple by going up through the floor, and then they would close the trap door down behind you, and then you were sealed in. Like that was the vibe that they were sort of. And then you'd have like earth, fire, like they were there in their corners, and they were playing that, because this is the final night, and they were there just playing their bowls. They had these special bowls things that they played. And it's just filled with incense. And then we lay down, obviously still in silence, and we all had our auras cleansed, which is a bit more traumatic actually than it sounds like, because it involves sort of being smacked with a branch, a wet branch, and then you have some hot, I don't know, crystals or something on your face, and it's very hard at certain points not to laugh, especially when Shadi starts channeling, because this was the thing, she would channel the voices around her, even if those voices weren't human voices, like dogs creating a commotion outside, she would try and make it kind of into the spiritual moment. So we're there and we're being cleansed, and everything comes to a conclusion, and suddenly it's over. The spell is broken and the silence is over. Apart from I couldn't speak. I literally couldn't say a word. I couldn't look at anybody. I couldn't. It was an ethereal moment almost. And none of us could. Everybody seemed to be experiencing the same thing, and we walked out into the nighttime and gradually came back to one another, started contemplating one another for the first time in maybe 2 weeks. Looking somebody in the eye was almost like a sexual experience. You were completely just electrified by the whole thing. Tasting food for the first time. And I've spoken about this, and whenever I've spoken about this subsequently, it's usually in a kind of mocking, have you heard about the moon course? You go there, you know, this kind of thing. But actually, and the reason that I decided to tell the story tonight was I found the notes that I made during that experience in my room this week, just kind of like packed away somewhere. And I started to read them, and I was kind of really surprised by the clarity that I'd found apparently during that 10 days or something of not being able to speak. It was just some might call them the scribblings of a retard. I'd argue that it was, there's something, we all know that words are incredibly powerful, right? But perhaps there's something even more powerful about the honesty of existing simply within a silence. Namaste.
Really